He's a former law enforcement officer who went to the United States military. He retired as a Master Sergeant for the United States Army Special Forces. He's been awarded the Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts. And now he dedicates his life to training law enforcement officers in special weapons and tactics, dealing with things like active shooters, hostage rescue, and more. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. Calling us from South Carolina, we have Robert Vaughn on the phone. Robert is a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant, part of Delta Force, and I know that's not the right terminology, and he's got a lot of experience. He trains law enforcement people. He's got some law enforcement background, and Robert, thanks so much for joining us on the radio show.
Thanks for having me, Jay. And just so you know, we don't call it, we're beat into not saying those words, so we simply call it the unit or CAG.
So we don't use the term Delta Force, it's unit or CAG?
Correct.
What's CAG stand for?
Combat Applications Group.
All I know is, and I was never in the military. I grew up in a military family, career Navy dad, and I grew up most of my life in Norfolk, Virginia. Very comfortable in the military, but I don't know all the terminology, and I have a lot of respect for our military men and women, our veterans, and our special forces, because I can't imagine doing what they do.
Well, thank you. It takes a strong family as well.
It does. I think for any branch of the military you're in, you certainly need a lot of help. There's no one stronger in the world than my mom, a Navy wife, because when he was gone, well, even when he wasn't gone, when he was home, she ruled the roost, and she did a very effective job.
My wife is exactly the same way. We've been married for 32 years, getting ready to celebrate, very special to put up with me for that long.
Well, tell her I said thank you as well for her support. And people say service, but they serve too, just in a different way.
Yes, they do. Absolutely.
So how long did you do in the military?
I retired in 22 years.
Okay. Thank you for your service. I understand from correspondence with a friend, you received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart.
Yes, I received a Silver Star, and I turned down my 3rd Purple Heart.
3rd Purple Heart. Wow. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later on if you are open to that. Now that you're retired, you are doing tactical training where you're assisting law enforcement, correct?
I am. I started Shadow Group Tactical Solutions this past summer. And just starting off as a law enforcement officer before I joined the military, I just want to pass along that knowledge that I've learned over these combat tasks years. The highest tactics highest TTPs that we've learned through all that combat experience, and I want to give back to law enforcement.
Well, thank you for doing that. Where did you serve in law enforcement?
I was a deputy sheriff for 5 years in Sumter County, Florida. And
then you went in the military?
That's right. I went exactly opposite of everybody in front of me.
I was going to say, it's usually the other way around. People usually do 4, 5, 6 years and then do a career in law enforcement. You went the exact opposite. I know one other guy, a guy I worked with in the Baltimore Police Department named Randy Everett. He left and went full-time as an officer in the Army.
Yeah, I went the enlisted route. As you mentioned, I retired as a Master Sergeant. I was promoted to Sergeant Major, but never picked up or never pinned the Sergeant Major bars. Well,
I'm, for one, not going to get into a whole dispute that sometimes pops up between officers and enlisted. My dad was a chief petty officer, so I come from that background. And by the way, to folks listening, I grew up in the Vietnam era, and the reason that's important is a lot of people I went to school with, they had dads who were POWs or MI or killed in action, but quite a few of them didn't know until the end of the war. And that was a big influence in our whole society and culture and how we were raised. And ever since they came home, I've had a sour taste in my mouth about how those men and women were treated. And I don't dispute political disagreements or anything else, but I don't like the way they're treated. And I see a lot of that happening nowadays with the similar treatment for law enforcement.
Yeah, I definitely see that same type of mentality towards law enforcement as what you're talking about. And, the Vietnam era, there was the unsung, kind of war. It was a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Those guys were, spat upon when they came home. It was just the way that they were treated was just horrible. But I see the same thing happening today with law enforcement.
And by the way, when I was a rookie police, most of the people who trained me, a lot of our law enforcement are military veterans. And I was very fortunate. Most of the people who trained me were Vietnam war veterans. And we even had a few commanders and command staff and lieutenants and above who were Korean War veterans. And they really were very good at what we now call community policing. They had the elements of things like respect, how you talk to people, things of that nature. Tactics change, weapons change, but the basics of just talking to people and policing is the same.
That's very true.
So you now work, tell us the name of your group and where people get more information.
Shadow Group Tactical Solutions, and edit. What did you ask, Jay?
That's the name of your group and where people get more information.
Okay. Shadow Group Tactical Solutions, I have a website, shadowgrouptacticalsolutions.com, as well as Instagram and Facebook. We pretty much travel mobile. We don't have a facility that we run out of here. There are facilities that I use that are local that I bring officers in from surrounding areas, that type of thing.
And people will get more information online. Some of the basic training you offer. We talk tactical. We're talking obviously about weapons uses and situations and how to deal with room entry, active shooters, and those sort of things, correct?
That's correct. And there's a list of services that I do provide on the website, but I typically run mostly custom courses depending on what the agency needs. And I like to focus on bridging the gap between law enforcement and special operations, because some of the tactics go across the board and could be used the same, but there's sometimes that those tactics, techniques, and procedures do not cross over. I'm not used to, announce and knock. So in the special operations community, we're pretty much, explode and go and flood the building. Surrounding call out is something that we've adapted, and being able to bridge that gap between knowing what an announce and knock is and how those tactics are going to change is what I'd like to bring, that I try to bring to the table.
One of the biggest differences I've seen, and I've not worked in the military, but with people who have, is that the mindset between American law enforcement officers and our combat military people serving overseas is that, yes, you have rules of engagement, but we in law enforcement are more reactionary. And in military, if you have a target and you have rules of engagement, you are more proactive and engage your target quicker.
That is very true, and that was one I was going to bring up. Is law enforcement is very reactive, and there's very few people, very few agencies that I've seen after retiring that actually do have a forward-thinking perspective. You mentioned rules of engagement, and so I only had 3 mandates that I had to go by. Is it moral, ethical, and is it legal? And then I could plan any mission off of those 3. And if they fit, once we came up with a plan that fit all 3 of those, then we were good.
One of the things, and we'll talk about this in length in the next segment because we're going to go to break here in just a moment. One of the things that irks me to no end that I'm sure we are going to address is, and I hear it all the time. I hear it in social media. I hear it from the news media. I hear it everywhere. Is the over-militarization of United States law enforcement. And I know you're uniquely qualified to talk about that. I'll just say this. Law enforcement officers in the United States, agencies, they adjust to two situations that stand out in my mind are the Austin Tower Bell Tower sniper and also the North Hollywood shootout that changed the way, in their own set of circumstances, the way policing reacts to these situations. Same with Columbine. We're going to talk about, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. What is the Haunting or Not podcast? It's a free podcast that takes a different approach to ghost stories, hauntings, and cases of demonic forces. Husband and wife podcast hosts mix comedy, facts, and a healthy dose of police evidence skepticism to help you decide, are these hauntings or not? Helping you decide what's real and what is fake or an overhyped exaggeration. From world-famous cases to lesser-known reports, they talk about them all in the Haunting or Not podcast, available for free on most podcast platforms. Or do a Google search for Haunting or Not podcast.
I am Meg Marie O'Rourke from Harmony with Food. Do you ever wonder what foods you should or should not be consuming based on your own unique needs? At Harmony with Food, we are now able to determine exactly what foods we should or should not be consuming through advanced testing. Test, don't guess is the motto at Harmony with Food's BioUnique Boutique program. It has never been easier than now to determine what food, drinks, and supplements you need for your individualized needs. Head over to harmonywithfood.com and click on the testing tab.
Return conversation with Robert Vaughn. Robert is retired Master Sergeant from the United States Army. He has shadowgrouptactical.com, trains law enforcement, bridges the gap, as you say, between law enforcement and in particular our Special Forces operators throughout the United States, and why so much of that transfers over. Before we went to break, Robert, one of the things we talked about is I get crazy when I hear people say all the time the over-militarization of our police. For example, the patrol rifle, the AR, those type of rifles that are in a lot of patrol cars now. We never had them. And the incident, I think, that had a lot to do with changing that aspect was the North Hollywood bank robbery shootout, where literally you had LAPD officers pinned down, shot, couldn't effectively return fire, and were going to gun stores trying to get rifles that they could use.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that as well. So the militarization of the police force in that argument, it's one of those, the tactics are going to cross, like we said already, they're going to cross over back and forth between the two. And the normal progression is for, a guy in the military to get out and he goes into law enforcement or first responder in some type of fashion. So those tactics that he brings to the table are going to be adapted by potentially that police force as well. So it's always going to be one of those crossovers that's going to happen. Unfortunately, I say this a lot to the classes that I do teach in the agencies is, and I noticed that, even the military, you don't know what you don't know. We talked before break about reactive versus, proactive,
right.
And proactive also goes into, training. So before we lose that train of thought on, the patrol rifle, I want to circle back to that. And, so the tactics have changed over the years. You first mentioned the Texas Tower. That was, Vietnam era, an elevated position, guy with that was a very good shot with a rifle and had several weapons up there with him. And none of the officers had anything other than pistols, and they had to run home to actually get their deer rifles to come back and try to take care of this situation. The LA shootout with the guys in body armor, law enforcement they hadn't faced that before. So, some of the other changing catalysts in law enforcement history, has been, we talked about those two. And then you got Columbine. Columbine kind of changed the way, that we no longer do this around the call out wait for SWAT. Now it's direct a threat. So we have to go in and take care of the threat. And that was brought upon by that. Virginia Tech, that shooting, it brought about the change in the notification system for the schools, as well as law enforcement's response. And some of the latest to, the Pulse nightclub, they used explosive wall breach on that. So is that going to be a catalyst for more law enforcement agencies to train in explosive breaching? And then the Vegas concert shooting, where he was in an elevated position, trying to fight it. He tried to shoot at the McCarran Airport fuel tanks that were there, placed an L-shaped bracket on the emergency exits to keep first responders from getting to them too quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of these, guys are law enforcement officers and agencies are constantly training on active shooter and, just thinking of the next logical progression.
And I'll be honest with you, we didn't have that terminology back in the 80s and early 90s. And it's not like those things didn't happen. They still happened. They just, we didn't seem to know about them as much. They didn't seem to be, what happened in L.A., for example, prior to the bank shootout, didn't hear a whole lot about on the East Coast. So when those things did occur, things began to change. I do remember situations we've had in Baltimore where we had officers who were shot and were down in the street. And we had, like you said, a man in an elevated position with a bolt-action rifle shooting at people. And we couldn't get there. We'd have to use the old trucks to try to get there and drag them to safety. And now we have these armored vehicles. And if you see an armored vehicle down the street, people go, what do they need that for? Mm-hmm. Well, we need it for exactly that reason.
Right. Yep. And, they're a great tool to have, especially for, recovering those casualties and making your approach and that type of thing, keeping the team safe. I've heard a lot of arguments about the ballistic shield and that as well. It's a great tool if it's used properly.
Why do you think that people have this mindset that that's okay for our military to have these tactics and these weapons and this equipment, but it's not okay for our American law enforcement to have it?
To me personally, I think, this is just Rob Vaughn talking, is that, these tactics are a necessity. The tactics for law enforcement officers to enter a building, going back to the active shooter, and the mentality of why do our guys need this type of training? Well, I'm asking a patrol officer to go in on an active shooter with the least amount of training whatsoever to actually affect a hostage rescue, because that's basically what it is.
And you don't have the luxury of waiting.
No, you don't.
Even back in the 80s, that was a standard procedure, was you secure the area and call for SWAT. But then was the commanders on the scene who made the decision, we can't wait that long, we got to send people in. And I hate to tell you, we went in sometimes, and I've had almost zero training on that sort of stuff. How I made it through, I don't know. Right.
And, we talked about that a little while ago. You don't know what you don't know until you find it out. I've been asked several times to do train-the-trainer courses. And this is one of those, again, it goes back to the active shooter and anything else. I can teach you how to do it. I can teach you one specific way to do it. And hostage rescue CQB is going to be very fluid, very dynamic. But I cannot teach you the operational experience. So those train-the-trainers that I just sent back don't have the knowledge of when do I need to switch this tactic to another, and learning those from actually doing it.
And that's what is the ultimate determining factor. It's the people on the scene and their experience. I've always say this, you can train for every possible scenario you can think of, or every possible scenario that's happened in the past, and somebody's going to turn around and do something totally different that no one ever thought of. And you're going to be like, how do we handle this? And I hate to say it, but a lot of times you just got to play it by ear.
Yeah, sometimes, and, it's a calculated risk at others. There's been several times where I've used something that was completely outside the realm of what tactically was sound. And it was only because that was the only way that the job was going to get done.
We are talking with Robert Vaughn. Robert is retired Master Sergeant for the United States Army, also a law enforcement officer. He trains law enforcement with a shadow tactical group. Get more information about what he offers. get their website, all the details. Do a Google search for Shadow Group Tactical, and you will find their website. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Discover the exciting world of podcasts at jefepods.com. From captivating stories to life advice and much more. There's a podcast for every interest and passion. Be entertained by your favorite radio personalities in both English and Spanish. Don't waste any more time. Find a great English or Spanish language podcast to follow and discover a world of possibilities in your own language. Find the best podcasts at jefepods.com.
You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. If you've missed past episodes of the radio show, never fear. You can listen to them online as a podcast. Just go to our website, letradioshow.com, where you'll find all the podcast episodes and much more. That's letradioshow.com. Return our conversation with Robert Vaughn. Robert, retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant, former law enforcement officer. He has shadowgrouptactical.com, trains law enforcement, bridges the gap between law enforcement and military and tactical applications. And when we talk about tactical stuff, we're talking about use of force. We're talking about shooting situations, active shooters. In your career, and I know you don't call it Delta Force, you call it the unit or CAG, correct?
Correct.
So I did a little reading, and Robert, you've got a Silver Star, and I think you said 3 Purple Hearts during your combat veteran experience.
I turned down my 3rd Purple Heart.
How does one turn down a Purple Heart?
Well, that's a good question. So what I thought was just a scratch really turned out years later that it was not so much a scratch, and still have 18 pieces of shrapnel in my right arm. But at the time, the medic is, one of my medics, so the troop medic said, "Hey, Rob, this doesn't look bad. You good?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm good. I don't need an award or anything. I've already got 2 enemy marksmanship badges already."
So take us through the incidents, the first 2 Purple Hearts.
So the first one, I won't tell you where it was at. So we were on a mission, and I was when I first got into the unit, I was on a climbing team, which means that we would normally climb and take the structure from the top down. Well, we were setting up ladders. Team leader walked around turned around the corner and received fire. So as soon as he received fire, he dropped. I went to go grab him and didn't know it at the time, didn't feel it, but I also was engaged and shot at that time. So grabbed him, patched him up, actually went and stacked up to go into the next structure, and that's when I started to get the kind of sparkly on the very outside of my eyes and realized
from blood loss.
That's when I realized that I was hit. Never felt the entry. I actually felt the exit, and it felt like literally somebody, that old game where you thump somebody with the tip of your finger.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. I thought it was a piece of stone off the wall next to me, but it was actually the exit of that round.
So that's the first one, and you stayed in your mission for as long as you could, even after being shot. Right.
And it's one of those things where even in training, like back then, we used everything was live. Like we'd have live role players, live rounds. Since then, they've come out with like the FX, the simunitions, and this type of thing, so that you could, and train force on force. So back then it wasn't force on force. You'd have live role players in the structure, but you'd have paper targets with target backers and bullet traps. So moving back to the second one, that one was a rifle. So it was an AK that I got hit, and it was basically a glancing blow and completely dead my arm. So that one I knew right off the bat that I was hit. Continued on with the mission for that one. Got back, got patched up, and that was it.
You guys make it sound like it's just business as normal.
Well, what I was trying to allude to, when I was talking about the training is, when we went to force on force, and I think this is one of those things, you got to train like it's a live hit every single time. So when you're using those force on force, no matter where I get hit, and while we're training, you don't quit. You don't quit.
Right.
You just keep going through the mission, and that builds up that training right there. I won't stop. No matter what happens. I'm gonna fight through until I can't fight through, and then I'm gonna patch myself up. So self-aid, buddy aid, and then medic. So yeah,
that's important because that sort of mindset was drilled into my head. And every law enforcement officer I've ever met or interviewed on a law enforcement show, from like day one of the academy, they started telling us, no matter how bad the situation, no matter how bad you're hurt, no matter how much your opponent might be giving it to you, you got to stay in the fight. You cannot quit.
No, you absolutely cannot quit. And it's, I remember one of the other podcasts that you mentioned, like the body armor, the second chance vest or whatever it is that you have underneath your uniform shirt. That's one of the things I talk to the agencies and the officers that I train with is there's a couple different things that happen. You got the combat chassis, and that's not a term that I came up with. It was actually one of my OTC instructors that you put your equipment on your kit exactly the same way every single time, so that when you get that final piece of kit on, you transform from the soldier to the warrior, and you're ready to do work, for lack of a better term. And going to back to the training scenarios, when you're trained like it's real every single time, you're kind of tricking the mind, but it also builds up those. You don't want the training scar of like, I can be able to shoot around the corner without looking at my sights, because you're responsible for every single round that goes down range.
Correct.
And so that tactic does not directly translate to what you would do in that real situation. So you have to train like you would do it for real on the streets, or it's going to build training scars.
I know from my experience, the mindset I had to develop to make it through some really bad situations. And part of it, to be honest with you, Robert, is I was always aware that there was physical danger, that you could get hurt. I was never really cognizant that this could be life or death. It was more like, this is what I have to do now. This is what I have to do now. And I got to go get that guy. I cannot. Mm-hmm. My mind is almost as if my mind was in sort of self-preservation mode. It was like, I can't look at the totality of what could happen. I got to deal with what's in front of me. That's it.
Right. And I was the same way. Being law enforcement, I always wondered, what would happen if I was put in this situation. And even when I joined the military, it was peacetime. So I was a Green Beret during peacetime as well as war. And I always wondered, okay, all right, so the first time I went into the combat rotation was in the unit. So I know for a fact that we were going after the world's worst targets, the hardest targets on the planet. So I literally, we have to make out our, last will and testament, our burial arrangements, make sure everything is taken care of, make sure your wife's taken care of, all the, I can't think of the word now, but basically she's taken care of. She can make the decisions, power of attorneys, making sure all of those are taken care of prior to deployment. So being this is the first time I've gone into combat, I resigned that, okay, I'm going to die on this rotation.
That's a heck of a mindset to go, this may be the end. And there were times I had that too. Not every day, certainly. Over a period of almost 12 years, there were times where I thought, especially when I was new, am I going to make it? Do I have what it takes to do this job? Will I be physically and mentally strong enough? And yes, I was, but that all took a toll, both physically and mentally. When we return, we're going to talk about the similarities and how what Robert has been through in the military drives his passion to help train our law enforcement officers, and why we need to change our mindset about the equipment and tactics used by our local law enforcement. Remember to check out our website for news articles, past episodes of the podcast, download our free app, and much more. That's letradioshow.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Get access to free podcast versions of the show and more on Facebook. Do a search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. And if you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @ LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, @ LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. If you've missed past episodes of the radio show, never fear. You can listen to them online as a podcast. Just go to our website, letradioshow.com, where you'll find all the podcast episodes and much more. That's letradioshow.com. This is Law Enforcement Today Show. I'm John J. Wiley, joined by Robert Vaughn, calling us from South Carolina. Robert is a retired Master Sergeant for the United States Army. I'm not going to call it the Delta Force because I'll get corrected. The unit, CAG, is also a former law enforcement officer, and he's the founder of Shadow Group Tactical. And get more information, do a Google search for shadowgrouptactical.com, land on their website, and find out what they do to help first responders. Robert, I appreciate your service. I say that all the time, and it sounds so shallow. It doesn't sound like enough. And to be honest with you, people have thanked me for my service in law enforcement now far more than they did when I was on the job. And I don't know how to respond. Even after all these years, I wound up saying, oh, it was nothing. And the correct response is, you're welcome. And it seems so hard to say that.
It is the hardest thing to hear because you really don't know how to respond to thank you for your service. Well, yeah, it's a very difficult question or statement.
It is. And even amongst, when I say other law enforcement people or first responders or military, I feel awkward. And I know from their response, they feel awkward too. And what we tend to do, and I made references earlier, and when you talked about being shot, is that it's just like any other Saturday to you. When we hear about our law enforcement and our military men and women, and I get why they do it, when they're on the press, if someone says, hey, you did a great job, that's heroic stuff, and they always downplay it. You know, it's a team, it was this, it was that. And I'm waiting for us to start changing our attitude and start saying, acknowledging ourselves, yeah, that's pretty heroic stuff done by some pretty heroic people. And we do this every day.
It is true. And, you know, I thank officers as well. You know, no matter if they tell me, thank you for your service, you guys have done a service as well. You're the front lines here. And, you know, like if you go on the website, you'll see that normally on Fridays or on Instagram, I normally change, you know, and post something about remember everybody deployed. Well, remember everybody deployed to me and to what I feel is not just us, military servicemen and women overseas, but also the men and women, first responders that are on the line every day. So thank you for your service, and hopefully we'll get to see you sometime soon.
What do you think is the biggest difference between our military men and women and our law enforcement as far as training and danger?
Well, as far as training, I mean, even a line company it does training quite a bit more than law enforcement. Law enforcement, I know, like SWAT teams, it's what the national standard is. It's 2 days a month to go out and train on, you know, a plethora of different things that they need to train on. So they pick, all right, we're going to do this tactic on this day, and then something else tomorrow, and then military trains at least once a week, and we had what was Sergeant Major Day or Sergeant's Day or whatever they called it during that time. You would have NCOs take responsibility for the troops and take them out and train with them all day on different tactics. Working through the woods, working through reactive ambush. Just this happened all the time, and then even on the days where you weren't doing that, you had guys, the team leaders or the squad leaders that were, all right, hey, let's do some hip pocket training, and let's go work on this.
I can be honest with you, I don't remember ever doing all that stuff. I mean, in the academy we had quite a bit of it, but after that we had a yearly in-service training for 1 week, and one day that was at the range, and I can't tell you a time that we had after graduating from the police academy, a time where we had actual physical defense skills training. Right. As a patrol officer, you were humping calls left and right. The special units like SWAT teams, they had time to train. They had more training than we did. We had zero. Once you graduated, you're on your own.
Right. And, that's, again, the patrol officer, the normal patrol officer, that's it. And for a while, he'll get his academy time, and then with his training officer, and then cut loose. And then you won't have anything other than like qualification once a year or, something along that lines. And if that's all that you're doing training wise, it's not enough.
And unfortunately, unless the officer agrees to pay the expenses out of their own pocket, a lot of times they're not going to get the extra training.
Right. And that's something that I'm seeing now is I do see officers pay out of pocket. I even see SWAT teams pay out of pocket to get training. And I never would have expected that.
It's a sad reality. You're talking about city, county, state governments, and their budgets really don't allow for a lot of it. And I can just say from my own experience,
that's the first budget that gets cut. Too.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at. And when it comes to life and death situation on the streets, it's not the life of the administrator that's in peril. It's that patrol officer. And it's a totally different scenario, as I'm sure you can attest that if you were in a gunfight with someone, it's a totally different scenario being an actual running gun battle than it is with some firing at paper targets that don't move.
Right. And there's I'll coin a phrase from Heartbreak Ridge. There's definitely a very distinct sound when fired upon, and you can definitely tell when it's aimed towards you or aimed left or right of you. And I talked to one of the agencies that I work with a bit, and they had a shooting a while back, and they confided in me. It's like, hey Rob, we had no clue where the gunfire was coming from. I was like, okay, let's remedy this. Do we have a range with a parapet? And I had to explain a parapet. And this is a term that, military ranges, we have like our sniper ranges. This is where I learned this technique is you're behind a berm in basically, a little valley, and you're putting the target up for the sniper. And he does this for you. So sitting there and not looking at the target, hearing that crack of that round going by, I knew when it was aimed at my target versus the guy next to me and down the line. So that's a learned response. That's an operational, learned action.
Right.
And being able to do that in an urban environment overseas, knowing the sound bounces off of this wall, and you can basically, work your way back. How many times have you been out and heard like a helicopter approaching in downtown, and you're like, "Where? It sounds like it's coming from this."
It's bouncing off every wall. It's hard to determine where it's coming from exactly.
Right. So being able to figure that out is basically the same thing that you're doing with the crack of that round.
Funny thing is, and this is a piece of advice I got from an old-time Vietnam veteran when I was a rookie police, and he taught me that when you're driving your patrol car, no matter what the weather, no matter how cold, how hot, raining, whatever it might be, make sure you have your driver's side window at least halfway down so you can hear the sounds of gunshots or people screaming for help or maybe someone coming towards you. Because that might not, you might save someone else's life, but the life you might save might be your own as well. And that was just, doesn't sound like a heavy-duty tactical tip, but it's something that's important.
And I used to do the same exact thing, and it actually gave you more situational awareness.
It's a term I never heard 10 years ago that I now hear all the time, and I tell people all the time. And I'll be honest with you, I tell my daughters that all the time. You know, don't be paranoid, don't be afraid, but you got to be aware of what's going on around you at all times. Before we close out, we are running out of time. Robert, we'll have to have you back on the show again in the future. There's many things to talk about. Tell people where you can get more information about Shadow Group Tactical and what you do.
So you can get information. You can either email me on the website or shadowgrouptactical.com is the website. I travel to you. That keeps costs down and for the agencies and officers themselves. Being a law enforcement officer to begin with, joining the military, doing the things I did, I wanted to come back full circle and give that knowledge, that battle-tested knowledge, back to law enforcement and save the guys here on this front line.
All right, thank you so much for your service. I know we've talked about how awkward that is when people say that and how to respond. I want to thank you so much for what you do now, and I want to thank you so very much for being a guest. All that is very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Jay. I appreciate you having me on.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.